from the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang. Welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast. It's great to have all y'all with us here this Tuesday morning, July 23rd, 2024. I hope everyone's week kicked off a little bit better than it ended. Obviously, the fallout from Crowdstrike continues. We're seeing increased attacks on critical infrastructure, including some real disturbing use cases coming out of the Ukraine, which we know to be the Russians' test ground. We'll talk about that on the show today, as well as did Wiz and Google just break up publicly only a few days after announcing a $23 billion deal. All of that and more on the show today, so stay tuned. It's packed. Make sure to subscribe, follow, share, like our show, and obviously, if you've got any stories, if you want us to do a deep dive on anything, please let us know. You can do that by going to our Substack, jamesazar.substack.com, or following us and sending us a message through any one of your social media platforms. So let's go ahead and get the show going. Before we do that, a CyberHub Podcast morning tradition. Cup of coffee to kick off the show. I've got my double espresso, coffee cup. Cheers, y'all. Good espresso on a Tuesday morning. Let's go ahead and start off with some of the fallout coming from CrowdStrike. So a lot of stuff around this CrowdStrike outage. And there's a lot of really good threads on X. And we'll get to this one right here by Zach Zorhis, who goes by @PerpetualManiac. And he talks about a CrowdStrike analysis, and he points out to one thing. Examining the update. It was a null pointer from memory in an unsafe C++ language. Since he's a C++ programmer, he decodes this stack dump for us. And apparently, memory in the computer is laid out as one giant array of numbers. They represent these numbers here as a hexadecimal, which is base 16 because it's easier to work with for many reasons. There is an invalid region of memory for any program. Any program that tries to read from this region will immediately get killed by Windows. And this is what you see here with the stack dump. So why is it trying to read? Well, because it's a programmer error. So based on this specific analysis, is pointing out to the fact that this was a programmer error that essentially caused the crash. Almost eliminating Microsoft as potentially being responsible for this. Yesterday and on Friday, we talked to the show, and there were kind of rumors. People were telling me, no, Microsoft did an update, so forth. Well, I was looking at this yesterday in really detail, and thanks to Karen Warstall and a lot of different people who sent me this X feed. I didn't see it prior. And so absolutely, it appears that Microsoft's not responsible for this. It may be programmer error. In fact, evidence in front of our very eyes tells us that they're pointing to memory that they shouldn't be pointing to, that essentially caused the blue screen of death. Now, additionally, there's the legal side of all of this matter. And while George and the team, the leadership team at CrowdStrike kind of came out and they've all kind of put their touch, feel like this was a rough day. This was a rough day for us at CrowdStrike. It was a rough weekend. It's been a rough few days. And yes, we get it. We sympathize with those feelings. Obviously, we've all been in those shoes at some point or another in our lives where an outage had impacted us, whether we were responsible or directly impacted, nonetheless. However, an attorney also reviewed the end user license agreement. And essentially, the end user license agreement doesn't hold CrowdStrike responsible for an outage like this at all. You can't even hold them responsible. The only thing you might be able to do is there's a clause in there, I think it's 8.5, that says that they will use industry best practices. So was this industry best practice? Now, that will likely get debated in court. My guess is that's going to be the case against CrowdStrike from a legal perspective, from customers who are trying to recover money lost due to this. By the way, Delta Airlines still canceling flights. Yesterday, 500 Delta airline flights were canceled due to this issue. So if you're, Ed Bastian, the CEO over at Delta Airlines, and you're looking at your C-suite and security, and you're saying, do we stick around with these guys? Do we sue them? We've got a lot of unhappy customers. We've canceled a ton of flights. It's costing us money grounding our planes. So there's going to have to be some repercussions to CrowdStrike, and that remains to be seen. For their end, CrowdStrike continues to say that now a significant number of the 8.5 million down Windows devices are back online after the botched update. The company is at the center of one of the largest technology outages in history. Microsoft confirmed on Saturday that it estimated around 8.5 million Windows devices were taken offline. Those includes airlines, federal agencies, hospital, banks, emergency services, and so forth. So you can obviously take a look. The world's top 5 endpoint protection platforms by vendor market share, and obviously behind Microsoft, because it comes built into Microsoft 365. Windows Defender does. They're at the top of the list. But then if you look at aftermarket, CrowdStrike right there at number 2 with nearly 14% market share, double Trellix and many others there as well. And so that's from our friends over at Gartner. And I say friends loosely. So social media on Friday and throughout the weekend was inundated with photos of the blue screens all over the place and even in Times Square. So we'll see how this kind of breaks down. But right now, it's not looking very good for obviously for CrowdStrike. Nonetheless, I think there's going to be very little legal repercussions. This case will be debated in court. And the court will eventually determine what an industry standard is. And this is, by the way, the feckless move by regulators and by elected officials. They write regulations that are so vague, and what ends up happening is the court's got to make that determination. By the way, and that was the Chevron doctrine, right? That the laws were written so loosely that the regulators could essentially create whatever doctrine they would, and that would be the rule of the land. But that's not the way this system, and at least in the United States, is based out of. The law comes from Congress, who are elected and held responsible, and the federal agencies are there to execute the law, not create it. So now this is going to be very, very interesting because it goes back to something I've said a while ago. We tend to regulate notification, not standards. And we tend to so loosely regulate standards and use broad terms, and then we want to let the courts and litigation kind of make that determination rather than setting it. And if taxpayers are already paying for NIST and CIS and our taxpayer money's paying for it, so use that as a standard in every legislation. Make that the standard. CISA should make that the standard. Congress and the Senate should make that the standard. That should be a priority. You got to use, if you're not using the CIS top 18, then by all means you're not using industry best standards. If you fail that, then by all means you can be held legally liable for it. Just saying. I'm not saying CIS is the best one. I'm throwing one out there. You can use the CIS, the NIST, CSF, whatever you want. But nonetheless, that's something really, really critical here. I think this is going to end up being very, very significant as we look at the fallout from this. And I think this is also going to change the auto updating in companies a whole lot. It's going to rewrite that playbook. Mark my words on that. We'll continue with Dragos sharing details on Frostygoop, a recently discovered piece of malware designed to target ICS systems. Frostygoop was used in January 2024 in an attack that disrupted systems at the municipal district energy company in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. The targeted facility provided central heating services to 600 apartment buildings in the Lviv metropolitan area, and the attack resulted in loss of heating for residents in one of the coldest months ever in the Ukraine. By the way, having been into Ukraine in January, let me tell you, that is not pleasant cold. There's no pleasant cold. If you get to zeros, like if you get to, it's sub-zero all day long. The sun's out. It's a lying sun. That sun ain't warming up Ukraine. That sun's skipping. Those sun rays are skipping the Ukraine. That air is so darn cold. I once walked to go get something. I was living in the Ukraine back in 12, 13 years ago. And I was walking from my apartment, which was in central Kiev, to a grocery store, maybe 2 blocks down the road. My hands froze. I had frost on my nose. It was maybe a 5-minute walk. It was cold. It's cold. According to Dragos, the attackers gained access to the energy facility's systems in April of 2023. They likely exploited an undetermined vulnerability in an internet-exposed MikroTik router. There was no network segmentation in place. It gave attackers easy access to the systems. They deployed a web shell. Then they apparently took a break until November, where they obtained user credentials from a SAM registry hive. In December, they again attempted to obtain credentials. On January of this year, they initiated the disruptive attack. Drago said the threat actor sent commands over the Modbus industrial communication protocol to controllers in the targeted facilities. The command was sent direct to Inco controllers from the adversary's host. The attackers downgraded the firmware on the targeted controller to a version that lacked monitoring capabilities, which prevented the operators from seeing what was going on. The attackers then caused the controllers to report inaccurate measurement. Specifically, the water was hot when in fact it was cold, which resulted in water no longer being heated and cold water being pumped to residential building. They didn't attempt to destroy the controller. They just wanted to make it really, really uncomfortable. And again, when you're in a war, the war's multifaceted. The Russians are excellent at it, by the way. And this is one way, target the energy sector. They keep trying that, right? And they keep doing disruptive because it essentially gets the citizens to rise up against the local government, right? And so anything becomes better than these guys here that can't even get us hot water. That's kind of the rule of thought there. Frostygoop is the 9th ICS malware discovered to date. From the Russians targeting the Ukraine. Obviously, and this has been now going on for nearly 11 years. So there's that. The largest trial court in the United States, the Superior Court of Los Angeles County, closed all 36 courthouse locations on Monday to restore systems affected by a ransomware attack that was launched against the courthouse on Friday. The attack hasn't been claimed by any ransomware operator and affected the entire network of the LA Superior Court. This includes external systems like My Jury Duty Portal, its website, internal systems like case management. While many on the court's network systems are still inaccessible as of Sunday evening, the court will close tomorrow in order to provide additional days to get essential networks back online. The court doesn't anticipate being closed beyond July 22nd. That was yesterday. However, I'm being told today that there's partial openings, not many, and the court is still in emergency. They're not really taking any cases, just FYI. If you're a Telegram user on Android, there's now a vulnerability being used to distribute malicious files disguised as videos, according to ESET. The firm identified a security defect after finding an ad on the Cybercrime forum for a zero-day exploit targeting Telegram for Android. According to ESET, the exploit was likely developed using the Telegram API, allowing developers to upload crafted multimedia files to Telegram chats or channels programmatically. The code exploits a vulnerability in Telegram for Android, which ESET's called Evil Video, allowing attackers to deliver payloads containing APK files that are displayed as multimedia preview. By default, Telegram downloads files automatically, meaning the malicious payload is automatically fetched on the user device. When they try to play the video, Telegram displays a legitimate message warning them that they're unable to play the file, suggesting the video should be opened in an external player. And if they do that, they're requested to install a malicious application posing as a video player, and then there's a zero-day exploit there within that. So Evil Video affects Telegrams for Android versions 10.14.4 and earlier. Users are advised to be at 10.14.5. DDoS for Hire Services Digital Stress was taken down on July 2nd in a joint law enforcement operation by the United Kingdom National Crime Agency. The Police Service of Northern Ireland also arrested its suspected owner, known as SkyOp. This month, an NCA agents infiltrated the communication services used to distribute DDoS attacks, collecting data on digital stress customers. So that's been disrupted there as well. U.S. is sanctioning 2 Russian cybercriminals for attacks targeting critical infrastructure. According to the Treasury press release, the 2 sanctioned persons are Yulia Vladimirovna Pankratova and Denis Olovakish Dorochenko. Both are key members of the Russian-aligned hacktivist group Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, or CAR. Pankratova, known as Yulia, is allegedly the leader, controlling the threat group's operators and acting as their spokesperson. And the Jorenko, aka Dina, acts as the primary attacker carrying out that. Of course, they'll never be brought to the U.S. This is just, another one of those name and shame that never ever works and becomes just something they get to brag about internally within their forums. A major Chinese crime syndicate is hiding a network of illegal gambling platforms behind a suite of stealthy-oriented technologies and shell companies with relationships to the top-tier European soccer clubs. Some have argued that Yabo, aka Yabo Sports or Yabo Group, and its many constituents brands can compromise the biggest illegal betting operation targeting Greater China. You probably haven't heard of it before, but if you watch any sort of European football, aka soccer, the operation enjoys a multi-million-dollar partnerships with clubs like Manchester United and Bayern Munich. Less visible to the public are Yabo's modern-day slaves, forced to staff the debt-fueled pyramid scheme underpinning its entire gambling empire. Apparently, there's a lot of dirty money in sports. Who would have guessed it? And a lot of gambling, and the Chinese are taking advantage of it. And finally, Wiz, on their end, have made a strategic decision to reject the $23 billion acquisition offer from Google's parent company, Alphabet. Wiz's rejection marks a pivotal moment in the firm's trajectory as it's looking to pursue its original plan of going public. In an internal memo, Wiz CEO Asaf Rappaport conveyed the company's shift in strategy. Let me cut to the chase. Our next milestone are $1 billion in ARR and an IPO, highlighting their ambitious firms amidst the backdrop of tempting acquisition offers. So we'll see how this works out for the folks over at Wiz, but nonetheless, just showing you the amount of money that's in the industry, and then the acquisition and consolidation that's attempting to take place. Wiz obviously acquired Gem recently for $350 million, and they continue their acquisitions. So they may end up being a power player in the cloud space through an IPO, and really one of the big companies in our industry going forward. That's it for our show this morning. We'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, live with all the latest and greatest cybersecurity news. Again, go check out our X at CyberHub Podcast for all the latest on CrowdStrike. You can also see that on our Substack, jamesazar.substack.com. Until then, have a great rest of your day, and most importantly, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.